Document. Part 1. The colony on Kepler 7b was not supposed to end this way. When the first settlers arrived, they had dreams of building a new home among the stars. The planet's vast plains stretched endlessly under twin suns, bathing everything in hues of gold and crimson. It felt like paradise, or at least as close to it as humanity could get so far from Earth. But now, those golden fields were stained with ash, and the skies that once promised hope filled with smoke. Laura Hayes stood on the edge of what used to be New Haven, the largest settlement on the planet. Her boots crunched over broken glass and charred wood as she surveyed the destruction left behind by the latest attack. Behind her, survivors worked tirelessly to salvage anything useful from the ruins: food rations, medical supplies, tools. Every day brought more bad news, more losses, and every night, people whispered about how much longer they could hold on. It wasn't supposed to be this hard. Humanity's expansion into space had been slow but steady, marked by careful planning and cautious optimism. Kepler 7b was chosen because it seemed a safer, distant world, untouched by conflict, rich in resources, and ripe for development. 4 years' life here had been peaceful. Farmers tilled the soil, engineers built infrastructure, children played in the open fields without fear. Then came the VORTHAK. No one knew where they came from, or why they attacked. One moment, the colony. Scanners picked up an unknown fleet approaching. The next, ships descended from orbit like vultures circling prey. Their technology was unlike anything humans had seen before. Weapons that tore through steel like paper. Energy shields impenetrable by any human craft. Worse still, the Vorthok showed no interest in negotiation. They struck quickly, mercilessly, leaving devastation in their wake. Laura clenched her fists as she thought about the last raid. Dozens of colonists had died when the Vorthok breached the perimeter defenses. Families torn apart, homes reduced to rubble, supplies stolen or destroyed. The colony's leadership scrambled to respond, but there was only so much they could do against such overwhelming odds. Their fighters were outmatched, their weapons outdated, their numbers dwindling. Without help, it was only a matter of time before the Vorthok wiped them out completely. Back on Earth, Daniel Carter sat in a dimly lit room deep within the United Nations Space Command headquarters. His desk was cluttered with reports, maps, and holographic projections of Kepler 7b. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as he stared at the blinking red dot, representing the besieged colony. The distress signal Laura had sent weeks ago played over and over again in his mind. Governor Hayes. Her voice crackled through the recording, strained but resolute. We are under heavy assault by an unknown alien force. We have sustained significant casualties and cannot repel them alone. Requesting immediate assistance. Repeat, we need reinforcements. Daniel sighed heavily. He wanted to believe help would arrive in time, but the reality was grim. Earth itself was recovering from decades of resource shortages and political instability. Sending a full-scale military operation to Kepler 7b wasn't just difficult, it was nearly impossible. Even if they managed to mobilize enough ships and personnel, the journey would take months. By then, the colony might already be lost. Still, he couldn't give up. Not yet. There had to be another way. Leaning forward, Daniel tapped a few commands into his console, pulling up a list of nearby star systems. Maybe someone else could answer the call. Someone closer. Someone stronger. For years, humanity had speculated about other intelligent species beyond Earth. Some believed they existed, but stayed hidden, watching silently from the shadows. Others thought contact was inevitable, whether peaceful or hostile. Now, faced with extinction, Daniel realized they had no choice but to reach out. If they didn't act fast, the colony on Kepler 7b would become just another failed experiment in humanity's quest for survival. He drafted a message, keeping it simple, yet urgent. To any civilizations capable of receiving this transmission, he began, his fingers flying across the keyboard. We are the people of Earth, currently engaged in a desperate struggle for survival against an aggressive alien force. Our colony on Kepler 7b is under siege, and we lack the means to defend ourselves. We humbly request your aid. In return, we offer friendship, knowledge, and cooperation. Please, if you can hear us, respond. Once the message was complete, Daniel encrypted it and broadcast it across multiple frequencies, hoping it would reach whoever might be listening. He didn't know if anyone would answer, or if they did, whether they'd come as friends or foes. All he could do now was wait. Days turned into weeks, and hope began to fade. The colony on Kepler 7b grew quieter with each passing day. Supplies dwindled, morale plummeted, and the constant threat of another attack loomed over everyone. Laura spent most of her time coordinating defense efforts, trying to keep spirits high despite the bleak outlook. She walked among the survivors, offering words of encouragement, even as doubt gnawed at her own resolve. Then, one evening, something changed. Sensors detected movement in orbit, not the familiar shape of Vorthok ships, but something different, larger, more menacing. At first, panic rippled through the colony. Had the Vorthok returned with reinforcements? Were these new invaders even worse? But as the ships descended, their design became clear. These weren't sleek, predatory vessels like the Vortex. Instead, they looked like relics of countless battle-scarred hulls, patched together with salvaged materials, weapons, bristling from every surface. They moved slowly, deliberately, exuding an aura of raw power tempered by experience. A single ship detached from the formation and landed outside the colony's makeshift walls. Laura watched from the command center as its ramp lowered, revealing figures clad in battered armor. Their leader stepped forward, tall and imposing, his face partially obscured by a battle-worn helmet. His voice boomed over external speakers, startling everyone who heard it. "I am Commander Elias Drake of the Kailari," he announced, his tone firm but devoid of malice. "We received your call for help. We are here." Whispers erupted throughout the colony. Who were these strangers? What did they want? Laura hesitated for a moment before stepping outside to meet them. As she approached, she noticed the weariness in their stance, the kind that came from surviving too many wars. Yet there was also strength, a determination that suggested they weren't just survivors. They were fighters. Elias removed his helmet, revealing sharp features etched with lines of hardship. His eyes locked onto Laura's, and for a brief moment, she saw something unexpected: empathy. Whatever these Kailari were, they understood suffering. "We bring aid," Elias said simply, holding out a hand. "But know this, we are not saviors. We are warriors, shaped by conflict. If you accept our help, you must trust us completely." Laura glanced back at the frightened faces of her people. Trusting these strangers felt risky, even reckless, but refusing them meant certain doom. Taking a deep breath, she extended her hand and shook his. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "We'll do whatever it takes to survive." And so, the alliance was forged out of mutual respect or shared ideals, but out of sheer necessity. Little did either side know, their partnership would test the limits of trust, morality, and humanity itself. Document Part 2. The arrival of the Kailari changed everything, but not in the way anyone expected. Their ships loomed over the colony like ancient beasts, battered and scarred but radiating an undeniable strength. The colonists watched from behind makeshift barricades as Elias Drake and his soldiers moved with precision, their every step calculated and deliberate. They didn't speak much, and when they did, their voices carried a weight that silenced those around them. Laura Hayes stood at the edge of the landing zone, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She tried to appear calm, but inside, She was a storm of questions and doubts. Who were these people? What had driven them to answer Earth's desperate plea? And most importantly, could they truly be trusted? The Kailari looked nothing like the saviors Laura had imagined. There was no warmth in their demeanor, no reassurance in their presence. Instead, they carried themselves like predators, lean, hardened, and always alert. Daniel Carter arrived soon after, stepping off one of the smaller shuttles that had ferried him from orbit. He had been monitoring communications from Earth and coordinating efforts remotely, but now he needed to see the situation firsthand. As he approached Laura, he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement before turning his attention to Elias. "We're grateful for your assistance," Daniel began, choosing his words carefully. "But we'd like to understand more about who you are and why you've come." Elias studied him for a moment, his piercing eyes scanning Daniel as if assessing whether he was worth the effort. Finally, he spoke. "We are the Kailari," he repeated, his voice low and steady. "Survivors of wars you cannot imagine. We fight because it is all we know. When we received your signal, we decided to intervene, not out of kindness, but because we saw potential in your species." His words hung heavy in the air. Potential. Laura frowned, unsure what he meant. Before she could ask, Elias continued, "You should know this up front. Our methods may seem harsh to you. We do not shy away from violence or sacrifice. If we are to win, you must follow our lead without question." Daniel hesitated, glancing at Laura. Her expression mirrored his unease. These weren't the allies they had hoped for. These were warriors shaped by centuries of bloodshed, carrying scars both visible and invisible. Accepting their help felt like opening Pandora's box. Once unleashed, there would be no going back. Still, what choice did they have? The Vorthok were relentless, and without the Kailari's superior technology and experience, the colony wouldn't last another week. Nodding slowly, Daniel replied, "We'll cooperate. But if we're to work together, we need transparency. Tell us what to expect." Elias smirked faintly, though it wasn't a gesture of amusement. It was almost pitying, as if he already knew how little the humans understood about war. "Expect death," he said bluntly. "Not just theirs, but possibly yours. Victory comes at a cost, and we will pay it if we must." The frankness of his statement sent a chill through the gathered colonists. Some shifted uncomfortably, while others exchanged worried glances. Laura stepped forward, her voice firm despite the knot forming in her stomach. "If we're fighting alongside you, then we deserve to know what kind of people we're dealing with. You talk about survival, but survival means different things to different beings. Are you here to help us, or to use us?" For a moment, Elias didn't respond. He simply stared at her, his gaze unwavering. Then, surprising everyone, he let out a short laugh. It wasn't mocking exactly, but it carried a bitter edge. "Fair enough," he admitted. "Let me make one thing clear. We are not heroes. We are survivors. Long ago, we were like you, soft, untested, clinging to ideals that couldn't protect us. War stripped those illusions away. Now, we adapt. We endure. That is how we survive." He paused, letting his words sink in. "As for why we're here, perhaps we see something in you worth saving. Or perhaps we simply grow tired of watching civilizations burn. Either way, the choice is yours. Will you stand with us, or will you cower in fear?" Laura opened her mouth to reply, but before she could, a young soldier named Rachel Monroe stepped forward. She was barely 20, her face flushed with anger and determination. "With respect, Commander," she said, her tone sharp, "we're not afraid. We've been fighting for months, even when it seemed hopeless. But if we're going to trust you, we need proof that you're on our side." Elias tilted his head slightly, studying her with interest. "Proof," he echoed. "Very well. You'll have it soon enough. For now, prepare yourselves. The Vorthok won't wait long before striking again." With that, he turned and walked back toward his ship, his soldiers falling into formation behind him. The colonists watched in silence as the Kailari disappeared into their vessel, leaving behind an uneasy tension. Later that evening, Laura and Daniel met in the command center to discuss their next steps. The room buzzed with activity as technicians worked to integrate the Kailari's advanced systems with the colony's outdated equipment. It was a slow process, fraught with frustration. But progress was being made. "They're not what I expected," Laura admitted, sinking into a chair. Her exhaustion was evident in the dark circles under her eyes. "I thought we'd get reinforcements, maybe some supplies, not whatever they are." Daniel nodded, rubbing his temples. "They're soldiers, Laura. Battle-hardened ones. Whatever. They've been through it's left its mark on them. But they're offering us a chance to fight back. Can we afford to turn that down?" "I don't know," she murmured. "It feels like we're making a deal with the devil. What happens if they decide we're not worth saving anymore? What if they turn on us?" Daniel sighed. "I don't have answers. All I know is that right now, they're our best shot. We'll just have to stay vigilant and hope they keep their word." Meanwhile, Rachel found herself unable to shake the image of Elias Drake from her mind. Something about him unsettled her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Determined to learn more, she wandered toward the edge of the landing zone, where several Kailari soldiers were inspecting their weapons. They moved with practiced efficiency, their movements fluid and precise. She lingered nearby, pretending to check the perimeter defenses, but her real goal was to listen. Another soft world. One of them muttered, his voice tinged with disdain. "They'll break under pressure, just like the rest." "They always do," another replied, his tone colder than the first. "But orders are orders. We hold the line until they crumble until victory is ours." Rachel froze, her heart pounding. Crumble. Was that what they thought of humanity? Were they planning to abandon the colony once it became too difficult to defend? Or worse, were they using the humans as pawns in some larger game? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Turning quickly, she saw Elias standing a few feet away, his arms crossed over his chest. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "You shouldn't eavesdrop," he said evenly. "It's dangerous." Rachel straightened, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "And you shouldn't lie," she shot back. "What did you mean when you said we'd crumble? Are you planning to leave us behind?" Elias regarded her silently for a moment before responding. "War changes people," he said finally. "It tests them, breaks them, and sometimes remakes them stronger. Your kind has yet to face that test. Whether you pass or fail depends on you, not us." His answer only deepened Rachel's unease, but before she could press further, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows cast by the towering ships. Left alone, Rachel clenched her fists, resolve hardening within her. No matter what happened, she vowed to protect her people, even if it meant questioning every move the Kailari made. As night fell over the colony, the air grew thick with anticipation. The Kailari's arrival had brought a glimmer of hope, but it was fragile, tinged with suspicion and doubt. For the first time in weeks, the colonists dared to dream of survival, but dreams, they knew, could easily become nightmares. Document Part 3. The days that followed the Kailari's arrival were tense and uneasy. The colonists tried to adjust to their new allies, but trust didn't come easily. The Kailari moved among them like shadows, silent, efficient, and always watching. They rarely spoke unless spoken to, and even then, their answers were short and direct. It was clear they had little patience for questions or doubts. Laura Hayes spent most of her time coordinating with Elias Drake, trying to understand his strategies and plans. Every meeting left her more conflicted. On one hand, the Kailari's experience was undeniable. Their tactics were precise, their knowledge of warfare unmatched. But on the other hand, their methods felt cold, almost inhuman. They treated every decision as a calculation, weighing lives against outcomes without hesitation. Laura couldn't help but wonder if they saw the colonists not as partners, but as tools to be used. Daniel Carter shared her concerns. He had spent years studying military history, but nothing in his training prepared him for this. The Kailari weren't just soldiers, they were survivors of wars so brutal that humanity could barely comprehend them. Their presence raised uncomfortable questions about what it truly meant to win. Could victory justify any cost? And if it did, would humanity still recognize itself afterward? Despite their reservations, both Laura and Daniel knew they had no choice but to cooperate. The Vorthok were still out there, lurking in the darkness of space, waiting for their next opportunity to strike. Without the Kailari's advanced weapons and expertise, the colony wouldn't stand a chance. So, they swallowed their doubts and focused on preparing for the inevitable battle ahead. Rachel Monroe, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had seen the way the Kailari looked at the colonists like fragile creatures teetering on the edge of extinction. Worse, she couldn't forget the conversation she had overheard between two of their soldiers. "They'll break under pressure," one of them had said. Those words haunted her, gnawing at her confidence in the Alliance. Determined to find answers, Rachel began spending more time around the Kailari. She volunteered for patrols, offered to help with repairs, and even joined supply runs, all in an effort to get closer to them. At first, they ignored her, treating her like a nuisance. But eventually, curiosity got the better of them. One evening, as she handed tools to a group of Kailari engineers, one of them finally spoke. "You're persistent," the soldier remarked, his voice rough, but not unkind. His name was Jox, and he seemed younger than the others, though his eyes carried the same weight of experience. "Why do you keep coming back?" Rachel hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I want to understand you," she admitted after a moment. "You came here to help us, but I don't think we really know who you are." Jox chuckled dryly, wiping grease-streaked hands on a rag. "Maybe it's better that way," he said. "Knowing too much can make things harder." "Harder? For who?" Rachel pressed. "For us, or for you?" He didn't answer immediately, instead turning his attention back to the engine he was repairing. When he finally spoke, his tone was quieter, almost hesitant. "We've been through wars. You can't imagine," he said. "Fought enemies that would make your worst nightmares look tame. Every victory cost us something: friends, homes, pieces of ourselves. We're not the same people we used to be. Maybe that's why Commander Drake says we're not heroes. Heroes don't survive wars like ours." Rachel listened intently, her chest tightening with each word. She wanted to believe him, to see the Kailari as victims of circumstance, rather than potential threats. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion that there was more to their story than they were willing to share. Meanwhile, tensions within the colony continued to rise. Some settlers embraced the Kailari's presence, grateful for their protection and guidance. Others remained skeptical, whispering warnings about the dangers of trusting strangers whose motives were unclear. Arguments broke out during meetings, voices rising as fear and frustration boiled over. One particularly heated debate erupted in the command center, where Laura and Daniel were briefing a group of colonists on the Kailari's latest strategy. The plan involved luring the Vorthok into a trap using decoy signals, a risky maneuver that required precise timing and coordination. While some supported the idea, others voiced their concerns loudly. "We're putting our lives in their hands," shouted Mark Ellis, a farmer who had lost his family in the last attack. "How do we know they won't abandon us when things go wrong?" "They won't," Laura insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "They've committed to helping us, and we need to trust them." "Trust them?" Mark snapped. "They barely talk to us. They act like we're children who can't handle the truth. How can we trust someone who won't even tell us what they're planning? Before Laura could respond, Rachel stepped forward, her face flushed with determination. I agree with Mark, she said firmly. We deserve to know what we're getting into. If the Kailari expects us to fight alongside them, they owe us honesty. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Daniel. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. Look, I understand your fears, he began. But right now, the Kailari are our best chance at survival. Yes, they're different from us. Yes, their methods are extreme, but we have to remember why they're here. They answered our call for help when no one else did. That has to count for something. His words calmed the crowd slightly, but the unease lingered. As the meeting ended, several colonists lingered behind, murmuring among themselves. Rachel noticed how many of them glanced toward the Kailari ships, their expressions wary and uncertain. That night, unable to sleep, Rachel wandered outside the colony walls. The air was cool, the twin moons casting long shadows across the barren landscape. She sat on a rocky outcrop, staring up at the stars and thinking about everything that had happened. The Kailari's arrival had brought hope, but it also brought questions she wasn't sure she wanted answers to. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. Turning quickly, she saw Elias Drake approaching, his silhouette outlined by the dim light of the moons. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Elias broke the silence. You shouldn't be out here alone, he said, his voice low. It's dangerous. I needed some air, Rachel replied, standing to face him. Besides, I'm armed. I can take care of myself. Elias studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Courage is admirable, he said, but bravery without caution is reckless. You should remember that. Rachel crossed her arms, her frustration bubbling to the surface. Is that why you won't tell us your full plan? Because you think we're reckless? Elias didn't flinch. Because I think you're unprepared, he corrected. War isn't just about courage or skill. It's about sacrifice. About doing whatever it takes to win, even if it means losing parts of yourself along the way. Most of you aren't ready for that. And you are? Rachel challenged. You act like you've seen everything, like you've fought every battle there is to fight. But maybe you've forgotten what it means to care about the people you're fighting for. For the first time, Elias's mask slipped. A flicker of emotion passed over his face, sadness, or perhaps regret. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Don't presume to understand us, he said sharply. You think war is about caring, about protecting the innocent. Sometimes, it's about making choices no one else wants to make. Choices that leave scars deeper than any weapon ever could. Rachel stared at him, her heart pounding, for all his strength and authority. There was pain in his words, pain that hinted at losses far greater than she could imagine. In that moment, she realized that the Kailari weren't just hardened warriors. They were broken survivors, carrying burdens too heavy for anyone to bear. I'm sorry, she said quietly, lowering her gaze. I didn't mean to offend you. I want to understand. Elias exhaled slowly, his posture relaxing slightly. Understanding won't change anything, he said, but if it helps you sleep at night, then ask your questions. Just remember, some answers might hurt more than you expect. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Rachel alone once again. She watched him disappear into the shadows, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite untangle. The Kailari weren't the allies humanity had hoped for, but they weren't entirely villains either. Somewhere between those extremes lay the truth, hidden beneath layers of scars and secrets. As dawn broke over the horizon, Rachel returned to the colony, her resolve stronger than ever. Whatever happened next, she vowed to protect her people, just from the Vorthok, but from anyone who might threaten their future. even if that meant questioning the very allies they relied on. Document. Part 4. The first real test of the uneasy alliance came sooner than anyone expected. The Vorthok, sensing weakness in the colony's defenses, launched a surprise attack under the cover of darkness. Their ships descended like specters, silent and deadly, their weapons cutting through the night with flashes of blinding light. Alarms blared across the settlement, jolting everyone awake. Laura Hayes was among the first to reach the command center, her heart pounding as she strapped on her helmet. Around her, soldiers scrambled to man their posts, while civilians huddled in bunkers below. She grabbed a rifle from the armory and turned to see Daniel Carter already there, his face pale but determined. "They're hitting the eastern perimeter," he said, pointing to a blinking red dot on the holographic map. "If they breach it, they'll have a clear path to the main supply depot." Laura nodded grimly. "We can't let that happen. Get everyone into position and tell the Kailari," before she could finish. Elias Drake strode into the room, his armor gleaming faintly in the dim light. He didn't wait for an explanation. Instead, he studied the map for a moment before issuing orders. "Divide your forces into 2 groups," he instructed. "One will hold the line here." He pointed to a narrow choke point near the eastern wall. "The other will flank the enemy from behind. My team will take the lead." Laura hesitated, unsure about splitting their forces so thinly. But before she could object, Elias fixed her with a steely gaze. "Trust me," he said simply. "This is how we win." With no time to argue, Laura relayed the orders to her troops as the colonists rushed to their positions. Rachel Monroe found herself assigned to the flanking squad alongside several Kailari soldiers. Her stomach churned with nerves, but she forced herself to focus. This was at the moment they'd been preparing for. The battle began with a deafening roar as the Vorthok unleashed their firepower. Their plasma cannons tore through the colony's makeshift barriers, sending shards of metal and debris flying in all directions. The colonists returned fire, their shots pinging harmlessly off the Vorthak's energy shields. It felt hopeless, overwhelming. But then the Kailari stepped forward. Elias led his team into the chaos, moving with a speed and precision that left Rachel breathless. They darted between cover points, avoiding blasts that would have vaporized anyone else. When they fired, their weapons emitted low hums rather than loud cracks. Yet each shot seemed to pierce straight through the Vorthak's defenses. One by one, enemy soldiers fell, their glowing forms collapsing into lifeless husks. Rachel watched in awed terror. The Kailari weren't just fighting, they were hunting. Every movement was calculated, every decision brutal and efficient. They didn't hesitate or falter, even when surrounded. Instead, they fought like predators, closing in on their prey without mercy. "Stay close," Jox shouted, snapping Rachel out of her daze. She followed him as the flanking squad moved around the edge of the battlefield, sticking to shadows and avoiding direct confrontation. From this angle, they could see the full scope of the fight, the colonists holding their ground, despite heavy losses. The Kailari carving through the Vorthok ranks like knives through paper. When they reached their designated position, Rachel spotted a group of Vorthok soldiers setting up what looked like a heavy artillery unit. If they managed to activate it, the entire colony would be at risk. Without waiting for orders, she raised her rifle and opened fire. Her shots drew the Vorthok's attention, giving the rest of the squad time to move in. Jock signaled for the others to fan out, creating a wide arc around the enemy. Rachel stayed low, using rubble for cover as she reloaded her weapon. Out of the corner, risky. Document. Part 5. The battle raged on, and the air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. Rachel Monroe clenched her teeth as she fired another round at the Vorthok soldiers guarding the artillery unit. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from exhaustion. She had been running, shooting, and dodging for what felt like hours. Her body pushed to its limits, but she couldn't stop now. not when so much depended on their success. JAX and the other Kailari moved like ghosts through the chaos, their every step deliberate and calculated. They communicated in short, sharp bursts, their voices barely audible over the din of explosions. Rachel struggled to keep up, her human reflexes no match for their speed and precision. Still, she refused to fall behind. These were her people they were fighting for, and she wouldn't let them down. As the flanking squad closed in on the artillery unit, one of the Vorthok turned toward Rachel, its glowing eyes locking onto her. Position. She froze for a split second, her mind racing. Before she could react, Jock stepped in front of her, raising his weapon and firing a single shot. The Vorthok staggered back, its shield flickering before collapsing entirely. Another shot finished it off, leaving its lifeless form crumpled on the ground. "Stay sharp," Jock barked, glancing back at Rachel. His voice was harsh, but there was something else beneath it, concern. She wasn't sure. All she knew was that she owed him her life. With the path clear, the squad advanced on the artillery unit. Rachel reached it first, her fingers fumbling, as she tried to disable the controls. "I don't know how this works," she shouted, panic creeping into her voice. One of the Kailari soldiers knelt beside her, his gloved hands moving swiftly over the alien device. He didn't speak, but his actions were efficient, dismantling the machine piece by piece until it sparked and died. Rachel let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her, but only for a moment. The sound of approaching footsteps reminded her that the fight wasn't over yet. The colonists holding the line at the eastern perimeter were struggling. The Vorthok's relentless assault had broken through their defenses in several places, forcing them to retreat further into the settlement. Laura Hayes stood among them, shouting orders and firing her rifle with steady determination. Despite her best efforts, the situation was dire. For every Vorthok soldier they took down, 2 more seemed to appear in its place. Elias Drake noticed the growing desperation among the humans and made a decision. Raising his hand, he signaled for his team to regroup. Then, without hesitation, he charged directly into the heart of the enemy forces. His movements were almost hypnotic, each strike precise and devastating. The Vorthok fell back, confused and disoriented by his ferocity. "Hold your ground," Elias roared, his voice cutting through the noise of battle. "Push forward." Inspired or perhaps intimidated by his example, the colonists rallied. They tightened their formation, pouring everything they had into the counterattack. Slowly, but surely, the tide began to turn. The Vorthok, overwhelmed by the combined efforts of humans and Kailari, started to retreat, their ships lifting off the ground and disappearing into the night sky. When the last of the invaders vanished, an eerie silence settled over the battlefield. Survivors emerged from cover, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. Some cheered weakly, while others simply collapsed where they stood, too drained to celebrate. Laura walked among them, offering words of encouragement and checking for casualties. Her heart ached at the sight of so much loss, but she forced herself to stay strong for their sake. Rachel returned to the command center alongside Jocks and the rest of the flanking squad. Her legs felt like lead, and her arms burned from carrying her rifle for so long. Still, she couldn't shake the adrenaline coursing through her veins. They had won or at least survived. That was something, wasn't it? Inside the command center, Elias stood with Daniel Carter, reviewing the damage reports. Both men looked grim, their expressions unreadable. When Rachel entered, Elias glanced up, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, he nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of her bravery. "You fought well," he said, his tone neutral but not unkind. "Better than I expected." Rachel wasn't sure how to respond. She opened her mouth to thank him, but before she could, Daniel interrupted. "We need to talk about what happened tonight," he said, addressing the room. "Not just the battle, but Everything. Laura joined them, leaning against a nearby console. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. "What do you mean?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "The Kylari saved us tonight. There's no denying that. But their methods, they're not like ours. They don't hesitate. They don't question. They just act. And I can't help wondering if we're becoming too reliant on them." Elias crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "War isn't about hesitation or questions," he said bluntly. "It's about results. You wanted our help, we gave it. If you have a problem with how we operate, then say it now." "It's not that simple," Laura interjected, stepping between them. "You're right. We needed your help. But we also need to understand who we're working with. What drives you? Why are you really here?" For a moment, Elias didn't respond. He stared at her, his jaw tightening, as if weighing whether to answer. Finally, he sighed and looked away. "Fine," he said quietly. "If you want answers, follow me." He led them to one of the Kylari ships, its battered hull looming ominously in the darkness. Inside, the corridors were dimly lit, the walls lined with strange symbols and glowing panels. They followed Elias to a small chamber filled with holographic projections, maps of star systems, images of alien species, and records of countless battles. "This is our history," Elias explained, gesturing to the displays. "Every war we've fought, every world we've lost. We weren't always like this. Once, we were like you, hopeful, naive, believing in peace and cooperation. But those ideals got us slaughtered, so we adapted. We became stronger, harder. Now, we survive, because we must." Rachel studied the projections, her chest tightening with each image she saw. Entire civilizations wiped out, planets reduced to ash, billions of lives extinguished. It was horrifying and, yet somehow familiar. The Kylari weren't just survivors. They were conquerors, shaped by centuries of conflict and conquest. "But why help us?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. "Why risk yourselves for a species you barely know?" Elias turned to him, his gaze unwavering. "Because we see potential in you. Because maybe, just maybe, humanity can learn from our mistakes. Or maybe," he paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "maybe we're trying to redeem ourselves. To prove that even monsters can still do good." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. No one spoke for a long time, each person lost in their own thoughts. Laura finally broke the silence, her voice soft but resolute. "Thank you for showing us this. It doesn't change what we've seen today, but it helps us understand. Just promise me one thing: if you ever think we're going too far, tell us. Don't let us lose ourselves completely." Elias met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I can't make that promise," he admitted, "but I'll do what I can." As they left the ship, Rachel lingered behind, staring at the glowing symbols etched into the walls. She thought about everything she had learned, the sacrifices the Kylari had made, the scars they carried. They weren't heroes, but they weren't villains either. Somewhere between those extremes lay the truth, hidden beneath layers of pain and regret. Walking back to the colony, Rachel realized that the real battle wasn't just against the Vorthok. It was within themselves, struggled to hold on to their humanity while fighting for survival. And as she looked around at the weary faces of her fellow settlers, she knew they would have to face that challenge together.